Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you upon the occasion of one of America's most wonderful holidays, Independence Day. We live in turbulent times. Some would even say we are living through dark times. And they are disheartened by the troubles of the world and in the direction of our nation. And indeed, a strong case can be made that the world and our beloved country are in peril. Wars, rumors of wars, terrorism, disease, famine, and economic turmoil, these things dominate the daily news. So who can blame a person for being concerned or even feeling pessimistic about the future of America? But you know, the world has certainly seen darker times, and so has the United States. Just think back to the Great Depression. In 1929, the stock market crashed, and a chain of events was set to motion that saw the worst economic catastrophe in American history. Fortunes were lost, and so were family farms. And when things could not possibly get worse, the Dust Bowl struck across the American plains. And just 70 miles from here in Portsmouth in 1937, a flood of biblical proportions occurred. You see, on top of everything else, all the suffering, the weather just went crazy. Staggering numbers of people could not find work. No work, no food. No work, no medical care. No work, no shelter. Those were different times. Here in Ohio, down along the Ohio River, at the very depths of the Great Depression, the floodwaters came up and swept away family businesses and the meager possessions of many people. The Great Depression and the bizarre weather patterns settled upon America so hard that it began to sap the strength and spirit of our great nation. Many questioned whether God had abandoned the very nation that He had inspired and blessed with such rich potential and vast resources. And as hard as things were for America, even darker shadows were descending upon the entire globe. Germany, Italy, and Japan were on the march toward world domination, and so was the Soviet Union. Entire populations were oppressed by totalitarian regimes, and the horrific seeds of multiple genocides were cast across Asia and Europe. The world was spiraling toward an abyss, and a weakened America could only watch as it all happened. Year after year, America became weaker, and year after year, dangers increased. In spite of it all, Americans told themselves that there could never be another great war. World War I had just been too horrible. Everyone knew this, and it had been called, after all, the war to end all wars. We had done our part to ensure world peace, and we had paid a heavy price in blood and treasure. And after the war, America underwent a nearly complete military demobilization. America withdrew into well-meaning isolationism, hoping that the wolves at the door would grow tired and move away, or perhaps even expend their evil energies on others. That was okay, it seemed, so long as the beasts of war did not come to the beds of our children. We exuded an openness and a desire to be tolerant that was tragically naive and which left our population vulnerable to the evil that was spreading across the world. During the 1930s, Nazis and Nazi sympathizers banded together for rallies in our cities. And members of the Japanese military worked closely with our own armed forces, learning the strengths and weaknesses of our armaments and our tactics. As the world fell toward darkness, we sat back and wished that it would all go away. But it did not. On December 7th, 1941, we were attacked in Hawaii and drawn into a world war once again. Our Pacific Fleet and air power were left a shattered mess, and we were wholly unprepared to fight a war against Japan, and much less against the combined powers of the Axis. In the days and weeks after Pearl Harbor, our leadership and our nation were in chaos. No one really knew what the Imperial Japanese military would do next. And there were wildly varying opinions about what we should do. It was this indecision, this ineptitude, and this profound lack of preparedness that left many to believe that the time of the great American experiment was over. We were weak, economically and militarily. The forces opposing us were technologically advanced and motivated by an enthusiasm for evil that would soon result in the deaths of scores of millions of people. Those, my friends, those were truly dark times. If indeed there were even Americans who thought that our time was over, this sentiment was felt 1,000 times greater by the malignant new dictators of the world. They did not fear America. They scoffed at us. We were seen as weak and backward. We were lazy, lethargic, self-centered, foolishly good-hearted, and hardly a threat to their designs of world conquest. And yet, from the depths of the Great Depression and the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, from the abject confusion and bewildered dismay of those dawning months of World War II, America got her act together and found her way forward. We were attacked in the early winter of 1941. Now think about this. Early winter of 1941. By the spring of 1942, our military was engaging the Japanese Navy in decisive battles that turned the tide of the war. And even as America was dealing hammer blows to the Japanese, we were preparing to invade North Africa, to engage the Italians, the Vichy French, and Erwin Rommel's infamous Afrika Korps. So in the span of just 4 years, as if by a miracle, our citizen soldiers rolled back the professional armies of the Third Reich, the Italian Empire, and the Imperial Japanese. We did not just defeat them, we saw to their utter destruction. When you read what historians have to say about this, many factors are cited to account for this great shift in fortunes of the nations. The historians almost always write of the great industrial potential that rested in America at the time, the factories that were at low production due to the Great Depression, the labor pool that had been sidelined but was waiting to be tapped, the vast natural resources that America could draw upon from within our own borders, and the fact that geographically we were a two-ocean country that could strike against the forces of evil from a single location. All of those things were true. And yes, our enemies underestimated us, as they always do. Even though they had lived among us, they understood us poorly. But what Hitler and Mussolini and Tojo completely missed in their planning was the true strength of America. They overlooked what kept America alive and intact through many wars and hard times, through the Great Civil War and World War I, and through the recent economic deprivations of the Great Depression. We were a nation, you see, that was brought forth and set upon the world stage by the hand of God Himself. Our founders were inspired by His Word to bring forth a free nation where the people themselves would be in charge of their own government, where those people would be able to speak freely, worship freely, to bear arms for their own protection, and not to be subservient to an all-powerful government. There were to be no kings and queens in America, and certainly no dictators. Here, in the founding of America was an example to the world of how God intended for government to work, a nearly ideal model that showed what could be accomplished when a set of founding documents were infused with the glory of an almighty and ever-loving Creator. After Pearl Harbor, America pulled together. And all of those things that are cited in the history books did indeed happen. A sleeping giant was awakened. Our industrial might, our strategic geography, and our unparalleled natural resources could not be matched. But by reading history books, you almost never get the rest of the story. You all know Paul Harvey, right? The rest of the story. The important part. The one thing that the dictators totally discounted began to happen as well. As the days got darker, as the times became harder, and when the world was once again set alight by the fires of war, Americans began to pray as they had never prayed before. We prayed as a nation, Democrat and Republican, Christian and Jew. Things were so bleak, even our atheists began to pray. Mothers and fathers whose precious children were engaged in bloody combat got on their knees and prayed from the depths of their souls. Here in our region, our faith was rejuvenated. Over the rolling cornfields of south central Ohio, and up winding hollows all over southern Ohio and northern Kentucky, where so many little churches were, people looked to God with passionate and purposeful energy. They prayed for peace, but not just for peace. They also prayed for the future of our nation. Our young men were called up by the millions, and on a daily basis, millions of prayers were sent to God from a godly nation. Those prayers asked for the safety of our American children, and the collective power of those prayers resonated in the halls of heaven. God is always with us. That is never the question. The only question ever is whether or not we are with God. Our local youngsters, who were literally working on our farms and in our grocery stores to help feed their families, who loved the Cincinnati Reds and idolized Babe Ruth and all things American, these young men went into the Army, the Navy, and the Marines and did what they had to do to defend our nation. As they left home, most of them for the first time ever, they went with the protection of their parents' prayers and with the prayers of a nation that had been inspired by God. Yes, America played a crucial role in World War I. We made the difference in that conflict and changed the course of history. But make no mistake, in World War II, America literally saved the world. We entered World War II pitifully weak compared to our powerful enemies. But the strengthened United States of America that emerged from World War II was able to check the designs of not only the Soviet Union, but also of Communist China. Now, how did all this happen? Those of us who believe in God know full well how these remarkable things took place. Yes, it was a miracle, but not a miracle that was born of blind luck. In a desperate time of great suffering and trial, the people of America returned to their faith in God, and that is what made the difference. God bless our young men and women who stood up to defend our nation in those days after Pearl Harbor. America has a resilience unmatched by any other nation in history. In those God-inspired early debates and in the resultant documents upon which our country was started can be found the mechanisms to repair any harm that our government may ever come to. The mechanisms that can correct any ill to which we may have drifted. When our military members enter service, they swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, the foundational God-inspired document that sets America apart as truly unique in the whole of human experience. We defeated the Axis powers because we did not turn our back on God. We won World War II because we were a nation that took our kids to church and kept our families together and knew exactly what we had to do when we reached the darkest possible moments. We knew to pray to God for the salvation of our nation, and that is what we did. And so here we sit today, men and women and children who remain free. Dark shadows still move across the earth. Another world war is not only possible, it's likely. We know this from a simple study of history itself. For there is a greater struggle afoot, the struggle between God and his adversary. The greatest of all wars, the war between good and evil. Our American children are at war on this very day, strung out in a thin line between America and those who mean to see us to our end. To stay free, hard work must be done, and sacrifice is required. In World War II, we lost our children by the hundreds of thousands. Now think about that. By the hundreds of thousands. So that America could be reborn, and so that the world could be saved from the evil of men. This is what is meant by the words, freedom is not free. After World War II came Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War, and now the global war on terrorism. The task of maintaining freedom is never done. It requires eternal trust and faith in the wisdom of our Creator, and it requires our eternal vigilance. So now is not the time to lose our faith, neither in our nation nor in our God. Now is the time to rebuild our faith and help our families and our friends and our neighbors get back on the right track. Now is the time to remember where the real strength in America lies. It is in our faith in God, plain and simple. Pray today for our country. Pray for those who have had the courage to don the uniforms of the United States military, who have left home and family to serve us in times of peace and in times of war. Remember always that God gave us our great nation and our freedom, and our United States military has been the instrument by which He has allowed us to keep our liberty. Who among us today are veterans of World War II? Do we have anyone that served in World War II here with us today? Would you stand, sir, if you're able? Are you able to stand? Can you raise your hand higher? Right there. God bless you. Thank you. Save the world. Five years ago, we'd have had a few more of those folks. 10 years ago, there would have been a lot of them in here. 15 years ago, we all knew who they were. Who among us today has served in the military since World War II? Would you please stand to be recognized? Everybody's a veteran. Stand up. Stand tall. Be proud. Thank you. Thank you. You have my thanks, and you certainly have the thanks of your nation. I will leave you this morning with a message that I posted Friday on my Facebook account to my Facebook friends. I have 5,000 Facebook friends because I have a personal account. I don't have one of those fan pages. I top out at 5,000. There's also about 500 other people who follow and watch what I post. Just to give you an idea of what I threw out there. I also placed that same message on my personal website, and I tweeted about it on Twitter. I'm not quite the old fogey that some people think I might be. I just want you to know that even though I am in politics, I am not the least bit bashful about letting people understand exactly where I stand. Here's what I posted, along with a very nice picture of one of my American flags that I had hung up for the 4th of July. Here's what I said. I am an American patriot, and I love God, my Creator, and His Son, Jesus Christ, my Savior. I will never be ashamed of these facts. I will never hide these facts. I will never bow to any person or ideology that demands I renounce these cherished parts of who I am, and I will not be silent. The world may be turning upside down, but I will not. I am embraced and unconditionally loved by God, and my rights and freedoms as an American citizen are guarded by the United States Constitution. On both accounts, the same is true for you. It is time to come together as one people. We must refuse to be divided by those who want to tear us apart. I will not lose my faith either in God or in my country. And then I put a little piece in there and said, wow, some will say, such controversial words you have penned. Really? Well, if anyone actually thinks that's controversial, that is exactly what I mean about our world going upside down. How could that be controversial? And then I placed at the bottom, may God continue to bless and keep our great nation, and may we always be free and united beneath our grand American flag. And from my family to yours, have a wonderful American Independence Day. And I signed it Terry, which is how I usually go by. And I don't really know how I could be any clearer than that. We have an elected official here today that's a friend of mine, Gary Shear, State Representative. Gary, would you stand up? I know that Gary shares my sentiments. And I know that Gary and I both wish that all of our elected officials would just come out and be clear about whether or not they're with us or not. And I wish that you would elect people that would stand up for what's really important. It's also time for every Christian citizen to stand up and be clear about where you stand. The time for hiding that light under the basket, that's past. In short, God has always been the difference for America. When we wander from Him, we suffer. When we pray to Him and lift Him up where He belongs in our lives and in the lives of our children, He has never failed to deliver us. Wars are fought with planes and tanks and bullets and bombs, but for America, that is not how wars are won. We win our wars because we do not fight for conquest, because we only fight in self-defense or to thwart a great evil. We win our wars because of our faith. Hitler and Mussolini and Tojo were brought to an end because America was godly and because Americans prayed in great numbers. I believe this with all of my heart. So where does that leave us today? It seems to be a disturbing trend that fewer Americans believe in God and worship Him in a meaningful way. The world becomes ever more dangerous, and we slip further and further away from God as a nation. That is not a good thing, my friends. As Christians, as God's instruments here on earth, we are failing in our mission to not only preserve the Word of God, but to bring it to more of our friends and neighbors. We certainly have much work to do, and we know what the real answer is. The real answer is another great American spiritual awakening. These come along periodically in our country, and if ever the time was ripe for one, that time is now. I say let it begin here, and let it begin with us. May God bless everyone here today, and may God continue to bless and keep the United States of America. May we have many, many more Independence Days, and may we always be the home of the free and the land of the brave.